The most dangerous man in the room is rarely the loudest. He's not the one performing confidence, smiling too much, or signaling safety. He's the one you instinctively know not to push. The one who doesn't need to announce boundaries because his presence already implies them. And somewhere along the way, you were trained out of becoming that man. You were taught to soften yourself, to be agreeable, to smooth every sharp edge so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable around you. You were rewarded for compliance and punished for intensity. You learned early that being liked was safer than being respected, that harmony mattered more than truth, that restraint meant silence even when something inside you wanted to stand up and say no. Over time, this training didn't just shape your behavior, it reshaped your identity. You were told kindness was strength, that turning the other cheek was wisdom, that humility meant shrinking, that if you were patient enough, good enough, accommodating enough, the world would eventually return the favor. But look around you honestly. Look at who actually moves through life unchallenged. Look at who sets terms, who isn't interrupted, who isn't casually disrespected. It isn't the meek. It isn't the endlessly understanding. It's the people who carry an unspoken warning in their posture, their silence, their eyes. A quiet signal that says, "Don't mistake my restraint for weakness." That signal is what this video is about. Not violence, not aggression, not becoming loud or cruel. Something far more unsettling and far more powerful. Danger. Danger isn't about harming others. It's about being capable of harm and choosing control instead. In a world obsessed with safety, emotional fragility, and curated niceness, you've been systematically disarmed. You've been convinced that danger is primitive, outdated, uncivilized, that it belongs to another era, another type of person. But what Niccolò Machiavelli understood centuries ago still cuts cleanly through modern self-help illusions. A man who cannot be dangerous is not peaceful. He is harmless, and the harmless are never respected. They are managed. A harmless man doesn't choose peace. Peace is imposed on him by his own limitations. He avoids conflict not because he's strong, but because he has no leverage within it. He calls this morality. The world calls it convenience, and systems profit from it. This isn't about becoming cruel. Cruelty is reactive. Cruelty is emotional. Cruelty is what happens when a person has no internal control and mistakes impulse for power. The dangerous man is the opposite. He is still. He is measured. He carries capacity without advertising it. Like a blade kept sheathed, not because it's dull, but because drawing it is unnecessary. There was a time when this distinction was understood instinctively, when every man quite literally carried a weapon, not to use indiscriminately, but as a reminder, to himself and to others. It created an unspoken contract. We are all capable, so we treat each other with respect. Danger was normalized, and because of that, violence was rare. Power was balanced by mutual recognition. Machiavelli lived in a world like this. Florence in the late 1400s was not built for the timid. Alliances shifted overnight. Betrayal was expected. Survival demanded more than good intentions. It required teeth. Machiavelli observed that men didn't rise based on virtue alone. They rose based on their willingness to be feared when the moment demanded it. Not always feared, not recklessly feared, but feared enough that others hesitated. His most famous line is also his most misunderstood. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. People hear tyranny in that sentence. What Machiavelli meant was capacity, to be capable of decisive force, and to let that capacity be felt, even if it's never used. Fear, in this sense, isn't terror. It's gravity. It's weight. There's an old Italian concept called terribilità, It was used to describe Michelangelo, not his art, but his presence. When he entered a room, people fell silent, not because he threatened them, but because he carried density, like a storm held back by will alone. Even popes hesitated before crossing him. That quality has nearly vanished from modern life. And it didn't disappear by accident. From the moment you entered school, you were trained to suppress competition, to wait your turn, to defer. Conflict avoidance was framed as maturity, not conflict mastery, which requires strength, but avoidance, which requires only fear rebranded as virtue. You absorbed the message slowly, subtly. Dangerous is bad, safe is good. Power is suspicious. Compliance is moral. By adulthood, the conditioning was complete. Standing your ground felt aggressive. Boundaries felt toxic. Authority felt rude. And intimidation, you were told, was the worst thing a person could be. But ask yourself this: who benefits when you're easily intimidated? Who profits when your instinct is to appease instead of assert? Not you. A population of harmless people is easy to manage, easy to sell to, easy to manipulate. Dangerous people are inconvenient. They resist. They ask questions. They don't move just because pressure is applied. And so danger itself had to be made taboo, not violence. Violence is obvious and punishable, but danger, the quiet internal ability to devastate if necessary, that had to be removed. And for most people, it was. The modern self-improvement industry finished the job. Be vulnerable, be open, lay down your armor, show your wounds. There is truth in this, but it's a half-truth. Vulnerability without power isn't healing. It's exposure. It's an invitation for exploitation. Predators don't heal their inner child. They study those who do, and they learn to recognize surrender by its language. You weren't disarmed with force. You were disarmed with kindness. And that brings us to the real question. Not whether you are good, not whether you mean well, but whether you are capable. Whether you can say no and have it land. Whether you can walk away without explaining yourself. Whether your stillness carries weight. Because the truly dangerous are often the most peaceful people you'll ever meet. Not because they're harmless, but because their peace is a choice. And choices backed by capacity change everything. Here is the paradox that most people will never understand. The truly dangerous often look calm, not because they are empty, but because they are contained. Violence is loud. Violence is messy. Violence is what happens when someone has no inner command and needs the outside world to feel their power. Danger is the opposite. Danger is quiet, patient, measured. A loaded spring that doesn't twitch unless it must. When I say become dangerous, I'm not talking about fists. I'm talking about reclaiming the part of you that has been trained to disappear. Your capacity for intensity. Your ability to say no without apologizing. Your willingness to leave a room the moment it becomes disrespectful. Your refusal to be guilted, shamed, or emotionally blackmailed into compliance. Machiavelli understood that control doesn't come from constant action. It comes from what people believe you are capable of doing if provoked. This is why he spoke so much about perception, not because he loved deception, but because he understood a brutal truth. The world does not interact with your intentions. It interacts with your image. There's a line attributed to his thinking that fits here like a knife into a seam. Never try to win by force what can be won by strategy. But behind that is an even deeper point. Force must remain an option, not used recklessly, not performed theatrically, but present, felt. like a door that can close at any time. This is what I call weight. Have you ever met someone who didn't raise their voice, didn't threaten, didn't posture, and yet you knew, instinctively, not to cross them? They weren't aggressive. They were grounded. Their energy didn't beg for approval. It didn't reach outward. It sat inside them like gravity. And gravity doesn't argue. It pulls. Weight cannot be faked. You can imitate it for a moment, borrow the posture, slow the speech, hold eye contact a little too long, but imitation always leaks. Because real weight comes from internal alignment. I know what I can do. I know what I will tolerate. And I am choosing restraint, not because I'm weak, but because I'm in control. A man who cannot fight is not peaceful. He is merely unable. His peace is not a virtue. It's a limitation. But a man who can devastate, who carries that capacity calmly and still chooses restraint, his peace is earned. And the human nervous system can sense the difference instantly. You are not as logical as you think you are. Neither is anyone else. 10,000 years of evolution wired human beings to read danger before language, before conscious thought. We detect it in micro-expressions, in posture, in eye behavior, in subtle timing. We feel the difference between someone who is performing calm and someone who is calm. Authentic danger has an eerie quality. It doesn't need to prove itself. That's why the man who overcompensates, loud, aggressive, constantly asserting dominance, reads as insecure. His excess is a confession. Every extra gesture is an apology for what he lacks. But the man who is still, he becomes a question mark. And question marks terrify people who need to categorize you, predict you, and control you. Machiavelli observed that most people judge by the eye, more than by reality. That isn't cynicism. It's psychological fact. People react to what they think you are, and once that perception locks in, it shapes the entire way they deal with you. What they attempt, what they risk, what they dare to say in your presence. So danger begins as a psychological presence, a signature, a silent warning that does not need explanation. But you don't get this by reading a quote and hoping it sticks. You build it the way you build a fortress, brick by brick, choice by choice, refusal by refusal. It starts with a simple question that most people avoid because it exposes them. What am I afraid to do that I know I should? Maybe it's speaking up when someone subtly disrespects you. Maybe it's saying no to someone who has relied on your compliance. Maybe it's leaving a relationship that drains your spirit. Maybe it's stopping the reflexive smiling that signals you can be pushed. That moment when your body tightens, when your throat closes, when your mind rushes to justify, to appease, to minimize. That moment is where your danger lives, not in your muscles, in your decisions. Every time you avoid that moment, you bury yourself deeper. You teach your nervous system, I am not allowed to take up space. I am not allowed to have lines. I am not allowed to confront. You become softer, not because life made you gentle, but because you trained yourself to surrender. But every time you move toward that moment with cold clarity, not drama, not aggression, something returns to you, your weight. The world feels this shift before you can explain it, because your behavior stops broadcasting permission. Here is the uncomfortable truth modern culture doesn't want you to admit. Weakness is not just tolerated now, it's rewarded. Victimhood is currency. The most powerful social move in many spaces is to announce, I am hurt, and make someone else responsible. Why? Because victimhood removes responsibility. It demands protection. It creates immunity from criticism. And most importantly, it signals, I have surrendered my capacity for danger. This is why it spreads. It is safe. It requires nothing. But look at the people who actually shape reality. They don't lead with wounds. Even when they have suffered, and many have, they don't build their identity around being harmed. They build it around will, direction, agency. Machiavelli used a crude metaphor about fortune, and people love to dismiss it because it offends modern ears. But beneath it is a principle. Life rewards those who act upon it. Fortune does not favor the passive. Circumstance does not bow to the polite. Reality responds to audacity, movement, initiative, pressure applied at the right time. This isn't cruelty. It's agency. If you remain soft, life molds you. If you become dangerous, you begin to mold life. And this is where the deeper psychological layer begins. There is a part of you that has been exiled. A part that used to roar. When you were young, it was awake. You demanded. You took up space. You weren't concerned with appearing easy. Then, year after year, you were trained to bury it. Don't be too much. Don't be intense. Don't make others uncomfortable. Your ambition was reframed as arrogance. Your fire was labeled dangerous, and dangerous was labeled bad. So you dampened yourself. And now you wonder why everything feels gray, why you feel exhausted, why you struggle to feel anything with the intensity you once had. The fire wasn't extinguished. It was buried alive. And it is still there, waiting for you to dig it out. Carl Jung understood this better than most psychologists ever will. He spoke of the shadow, the parts of you that were deemed unacceptable and pushed into the unconscious, not evil parts, powerful parts, wild parts, protective parts, the parts that would not kneel. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely. Terrifying because complete acceptance means admitting you have darkness, not as a moral stain, but as a capacity. It means acknowledging the part of you that could dominate, manipulate, destroy. Not because you want to, but because you could. This is the integration of the shadow, and it is where real danger is born. A whole person contains light and darkness, gentleness and severity, compassion and decisive force. When both exist, you become rare. Someone who can be kind without being naive. Someone whose kindness is not an apology. Someone whose restraint is a choice, backed by capability. A lamb is not kind for refusing to attack. It simply cannot. But a lion who chooses peace, that is something else entirely. That is dangerous. Now let me be specific. Being dangerous in the modern world does not require physical domination, though physical competence helps. It does not require wealth, though resources create options. It does not require powerful allies, though isolation is vulnerability. What it requires first, above all, is internal non-negotiability, lines inside you that cannot be crossed. Not society's lines, yours. Because most people have none. They fold under pressure. They abandon values to avoid discomfort. They sell integrity for approval. That's what makes them manageable. The dangerous person is unmanageable, not because they rebel for attention, but because there are things they will not trade away. And when a person has that inner spine, you can feel it in their words. Not because they talk more, because their words carry consequence. Once internal non-negotiability is established, danger begins to leak outward, not loudly, not theatrically, but unmistakably. People think power announces itself. In reality, power reveals itself through friction, through the way the world starts to respond differently when you stop yielding. The modern dangerous person is not built through grand gestures. He is built through micro-decisions that reprogram how others experience him. Posture, voice, eyes, boundaries. These are not cosmetic details. They are signals to the nervous system, yours and theirs. Let's start with the body, because the body speaks before language ever gets a chance. Long before someone hears your words, they register how you occupy space. Most people move apologetically. They rush. They lean inward. They fold their shoulders as if asking permission to exist. They unconsciously communicate, "I am adjustable." Danger begins when you stop doing that. Not by puffing your chest or posturing dominance, but by slowing down. By standing as if the ground belongs to you. By moving deliberately, as though every step has already been approved internally. Stillness is especially important. A person who can hold still without fidgeting sends a primal signal. I am comfortable here. I am not in a hurry to please. Stillness unnerves people because it removes the usual feedback loop. They can't read you through nervous movement. They can't soothe themselves by watching you shrink. Then comes the voice. A dangerous voice is not loud. Loudness is compensation. A dangerous voice is controlled, measured, slightly slower than expected. It doesn't rush to fill silence. It doesn't apologize with filler words. Like, you know. These are verbal bows. They signal uncertainty. They invite interruption. When you speak as if words cost something, people listen. When you pause before responding, not theatrically, not manipulatively, but deliberately, you force the other person to sit inside your consideration. That pause says, I am not reactive. I cannot be rushed. I decide when this moves forward. The eyes complete the circuit. Most soft people avert their gaze at the first hint of tension. They look away when challenged. They glance down when someone pushes. The dangerous person does none of that, but neither do they stare aggressively. Aggression is desperate. Stillness is sovereign. They hold eye contact calmly. When challenged, they don't look away first. When someone attempts intimidation, they meet it with patience. The message is subtle but devastating. I am not afraid of this moment. And when the eyes communicate that, the moment itself changes. Then there are boundaries. Dangerous people do not announce their limits. They demonstrate them. They don't argue about disrespect. They don't negotiate with manipulation. They don't over-explain why something isn't acceptable. Explanation invites debate. Debate invites erosion. Instead, they act. Sometimes that action is withdrawal. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a single sentence delivered without heat, without justification. That won't happen again, not as a threat, as a fact. And the other person knows, without being able to explain why, that it's real. This is how edge is built. Not in one dramatic confrontation, but in hundreds of small recalibrations. Each time you refuse to rush. Each time you hold your ground. Each time you walk away without explaining yourself. Over time, these choices harden into identity. And identity is magnetic. But here's what no one warns you about. Once you begin changing this way, the world will push back. The people who benefited from your softness will feel the loss immediately. They will call your boundaries arrogance. They will call your silence coldness. They will say, you've changed, and they will not mean it as praise. This is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you've stopped being useful in the way they preferred. Some people will adapt. They will respect the new shape of you. Others will try to force you back into the old one. They will guilt you, gaslight you, invoke nostalgia. The old you was easier. The old you was convenient. Let them struggle, because transformation always reveals the true nature of relationships. Those built on respect evolve. Those built on access collapse, and the dangerous person does not cling to relationships that require his weakness. Machiavelli understood this. Introducing a new order creates enemies, but remaining the same creates decay. Better to be tested and sharpened than comfortable and hollow. There is a form of power that does not announce itself. It withdraws. Most people misunderstand it because they were trained to equate silence with weakness and distance with fear. Machiavelli knew better. To him, withdrawal was not retreat. It was dominance through absence. The ability to step back without losing influence is one of the most unsettling capacities a person can develop. The harmless man is always present, always reachable, always explaining. He believes accessibility equals value. That being available proves loyalty, warmth, goodness. In reality, it does the opposite. What is always available becomes expected. What is expected becomes taken for granted, and what is taken for granted is controlled. Predictability is not integrity. It is exposure. When people know exactly how you will respond, they stop respecting your boundaries. They learn your emotional reflexes. They discover how to provoke, how to guilt, how to extract. You think you are being consistent. You are being studied. Your reliability becomes their leverage. The dangerous person breaks this pattern quietly, not with chaos, not with emotional games, but with selective absence, with silence that arrives without explanation, with the refusal to respond on command. When you stop replying immediately, stop justifying your choices, stop showing up every time someone tugs the rope, something subtle happens. The atmosphere shifts. People feel the loss before they understand it. They do not miss you. They miss their access to you. This is the distinction most people never see. People rarely fear losing affection. They fear losing control, losing predictability, losing the ability to summon you whenever it suits them. Machiavelli understood that scarcity is the foundation of influence. A ruler who is always visible becomes familiar. Familiarity breeds contempt. But the one who controls when and how he appears acquires gravity. Absence, when intentional, forces reflection. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums reveal truth. When you withdraw without drama, without explanation, others are left alone with their assumptions. Why didn't he respond? Why didn't he chase? Why didn't he defend himself? In that unanswered space, the power dynamic begins to invert. Silence is especially powerful because it breaks scripts. Manipulative people rely on reaction. They need your anger, your reassurance, your guilt, your explanations. Silence denies them fuel. It removes the handles they use to steer you. When you do not react, they speak more. They escalate. They expose themselves trying to regain control of the frame you stepped out of. This is psychological gravity. You conserve energy while they spend theirs. And energy is not abstract. It is currency. Every argument you don't need to win drains you. Every unnecessary explanation leaks authority. Every emotional fire you rush to put out trains others to treat you as their stabilizer. Machiavelli would call this strategic incompetence. A man who spends his power everywhere has none when it matters. The dangerous person becomes disciplined with engagement. He does not answer everything. He does not attend every conflict. He does not react simply because something is loud. He understands that the one who stays centered while others flail becomes the axis of the situation. This requires emotional control, not emotional numbness. mastery. Every time someone provokes you, they are testing for a handle. The moment you snap, defend, over-explain, or chase resolution, you reveal where you are still governable. The man who remains calm in the face of provocation sends a silent message. This does not move me. Calm in chaos reads as authority. But there is a cost. Withdrawal creates a period of discomfort. When you stop being endlessly available, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop performing the role others depended on, a void appears. At first it feels like freedom. Then doubt creeps in. Am I being too cold? Did I go too far? This is not loss. This is detox. You are not losing people. You are shedding a version of yourself that survived by being needed, that confused usefulness with worth. That version cannot coexist with sovereignty. It has to dissolve. Machiavelli would not soften this moment for you. He understood that power is not born in applause. It is born in solitude. Not permanent isolation, but the temporary silence where dependency on approval dies, where self-command takes its place. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, it becomes valuable. When your silence is deliberate, it becomes loud. And when your availability is selective, you stop being managed. You begin to be respected. Here is the final illusion that must die. Being dangerous is not about dominating others. That is the fantasy of insecure people who confuse control with power. Real danger is quieter. It begins and ends with self-rule. Machiavelli never admired chaos. He admired effectiveness, and effectiveness requires restraint. Power without restraint collapses into tyranny. Strength without direction becomes destruction. The truly dangerous person is not someone who has abandoned ethics, but someone who has internalized them so deeply that they no longer need external enforcement. This is why danger must be paired with wisdom. A person who has never confronted their capacity for harm is not virtuous. They are untested. They avoid cruelty not because it is beneath them, but because they are afraid of it. The integrated person is different. They have looked directly at what they could do if pushed too far. They have accepted it, and because of that acceptance, they are no longer ruled by it. Carl Jung called this integration of the shadow. Not becoming evil, but absorbing the capacity for evil into conscious control. When you know exactly how far you could go, you no longer need to go there impulsively. You can be patient because you have felt rage. You can be forgiving because you know what revenge would cost. You can be gentle because gentleness is no longer your only option. This is the only kindness that is respected. A lamb is not kind. It is incapable. A lion who chooses restraint is something else entirely. That choice carries weight. People feel it. They sense that your civility is not submission, that your silence is not fear, that your patience is not weakness. They know, without being told, that another option exists, and that you are choosing not to take it. That is danger refined into dignity. Once you reach this point, the world responds differently. You stop chasing respect because you no longer need permission to stand where you stand. Conversations shift. Negotiations change. People test you less, not because you threaten them, but because they sense there is nothing to gain by pushing. You speak less, but your words land harder. You move less, but your actions carry finality. You no longer rush to correct misunderstandings. You allow others to sit with the consequences of misreading you. And in doing so, you reclaim something most people never touch. Certainty, not arrogance. Certainty. The certainty that you will not abandon yourself. That you will enforce your lines calmly. That you can walk away without collapsing. That pressure does not own you. That approval is optional. That comfort is negotiable. that integrity is not. This path is not glamorous. No one applauds self-command. The soft world does not celebrate the dangerous. It prefers the compliant, the predictable, the endlessly explainable. But you will feel the difference immediately. A deeper calm, a heavier presence, a strange lightness that comes from alignment. You are no longer performing safety. You are choosing restraint. And that choice changes everything. This is not a destination. It is a discipline, an ongoing conversation between who you are and who you refuse to become. The work does not end here. It begins here. In the next decision, in the next moment, you choose weight over ease, clarity over comfort, self-respect over approval. You were never incapable of being dangerous. You were only taught to apologize for it. Now you know better.